Apple users' old photos are suddenly reappearing. Police can track Bluetooth devices in moving cars. The latest privacy news from Google's I/O event this past week, and more. Welcome to Surveillance Report 178, where we are dedicated to keeping you private and secure with the latest news from the past week. I am Nathan from The New Oil.
And I'm Henry from Techlore.
This week's podcast is brought to you by you guys. You are the ones who keep us going. If you want to support this podcast and help keep it regular and consistent, we have a Patreon. That is the most common way to support us. You get perks in return. You can ask us a question for the Q&A, or you don't have to listen to this pitch every time. If you prefer not to have Patreon and you just want something that's set it and forget it, we have LibrePay. It's open source. It's a little bit more privacy respecting. And of course, we still accept Monero, which is the most private and anonymous way to support us. So anything does help, and we really appreciate you keeping us going. Our highlight story this week. iOS 17.5 is allegedly resurfacing pictures that were deleted years ago for some users. This is mostly the entire article. It's very short, so I'm just going to read it all. A bug in iOS 17.5 is allegedly resurfacing photos that were deleted years ago for some iPhone users, according to posts on Reddit. One user says, quote, "When in conversation with my partner, I went to send a picture and saw that our latest pictures were NSFW material we'd made years ago when we were living apart. It was permanently deleted years ago, but magically it's back. I checked my iPad and it also has pictures, some artwork I did years ago. I feel so uncomfortable." Someone else replied, "Same here. I have 4 pictures from 2010 that keep reappearing as the latest pics uploaded to iCloud. I have deleted them repeatedly." There are a number of reports of similar situations in the thread on Reddit. Some users are seeing deleted images from years ago reappear in their libraries, while others are seeing images from earlier this year. By default, the Photos app has a recently deleted feature that preserves deleted images for 30 days. That is not what's happening here, seeing as most of the images in question are months or years old, not days. Apple still has not commented on the problem, but it naturally raises countless concerns and questions about privacy and data retention. Some users on Reddit speculate that 17.5 may have made changes to the Photos app that required the app to re-index photo libraries. Still, even if the app goes through some sort of re-indexing process, there's no excuse for images that users thought were deleted to reappear. So we went to check just now, give you the most up-to-the-minute news possible to see if there's an update from Apple. There still is not. There is one user claiming that they sold their iPad and these photos reappeared. The author of this article said they have reason to believe that's not true, but they didn't really speculate why. Man, this is not a good look for Apple. On the one hand, it's really hard to say, to kind of give a fair assessment without hearing Apple's side of the story. On the other hand, it would have to be a very convincing story. At this point, I updated my phone earlier this week and I didn't have any photos appear. What I'd also be interested to know is, now that I think about it, I don't use iCloud and I haven't for years. And I'm pretty sure I'm using a new Apple ID that I made after I got into privacy, which means nothing I've ever done on that phone has ever been uploaded to iCloud. So I would be interested to hear if, number one, are there other people like me who have had their photos come back even though they were never in iCloud? And number two, are there people who stopped using iCloud and had this problem, but none of the photos are from after they stopped using iCloud? Because what that would indicate is that Apple doesn't delete photos. I mean, it's that simple. I hesitate to say we can't say for sure because this is a smoking gun in my opinion, but at the same time, it seems very unlikely, but maybe there is some kind of explanation they would give that's like, oh, that does make sense, but I got nothing.
I mean, I have so many questions, and I feel like we can't really make a great conclusion out of this until we get more information. We don't even know who was impacted by this, the number of people impacted by this, why they were impacted by this, and what this even is. We don't know what's causing it. We don't know the extent of it. No one really knows what's going on, and so it's hard for me to be able to give any real assessment of the situation outside of be aware of this. And I don't necessarily think that this reflects general privacy and security of the company, but it definitely impacts their stability, a bug. I think this is more of a bug more than anything. But obviously, this is something that's really bad, and it's a bug that has huge privacy implications, if that makes sense. I feel really weird about it, and it's hard for me to really comment on it without having more information to work off of.
I do kind of agree, except for the part where you say you think it's a bug, because what would it be a bug for? Are you saying that when users are deleting their photos, it's staying in their trash on iCloud? Is that what you're implying?
Wait, why do you think this isn't a bug? Do you think Apple intentionally is not deleting people's photos?
Oh, that's what you're saying is a bug, is that the photos aren't being deleted is a bug.
This whole thing sounds like a massive bug. It sounds like there might have been some weird, like, situation where photos weren't being deleted 10 years ago, and now this current version of iOS for some reason is like bringing that back out. Like, let's take the indexing thing at face value. Let's say it's an indexing thing, and now they're indexing photos differently. For all we know, this bug actually is from 10 years ago.
Okay, but now that raises the question, and I'm normally the one to say, like, storage is dirt cheap, but we're talking millions of users for 14 years.
We don't know if it's millions. We don't even know we don't know anything. This could be like 100 people for all we know.
Okay. I could maybe see that. That feels like a stretch, though. I got to be honest.
I agree. I'm not even I'm not saying that's my stance. My point is, I don't know what my stance is because I feel like it can go totally either direction. I feel like next week we're going to hear that this was like some BS Apple thing and that they were like trying to implement. It was totally intentional, but then something happened and now they're like, oh, or it really was like between iOS 3 and iOS 10, they had some weird deletion thing that just didn't process correctly, and now we're seeing the effects of it now, and it's not even like a relevant issue for the last 5 years. I don't know what to even make of this story. It's so crazy to me that this was ever a thing, but I also just don't know. It doesn't excuse the problem, but obviously we want to know the intent and we want to know why it happened, because if it happened for very bad reasons, then it might show oh, wow, this is actually really bad. And it shows a lack of attention to detail, which can represent other issues that we should be looking at as well. Or it could be something that's actually defendable, that any company, even the best companies, could make that mistake. And in that case, it's a very different story.
I mean, I will say there's silence for the past. This story happened earlier this week, and the fact that they haven't made even a statement of hey, we don't know what's going on either. Let's look into that. The fact that they've just been dead silent is definitely not a good look.
I agree. I fully agree. I think that the fact there's no information sucks.
It's hard because there is that part of me that sees where you're coming from, and you make a good point. If it was 100 people that had this, let's say it was genuinely a bug, and there were 100 people, a company the size of Apple, I could see how their photos, they might not notice, oh, we have this one hard drive that's really filling up. But at the same time, there's that part of me that doesn't want to just stick my head in the sand and let my bias take over and be oh, but Apple usually does the right thing, usually with a heavy, heavy asterisk on that one.
I'm trying to find some takes from some kind of security researchers on this, and the closest thing, this is searching in real time as we're recording. I didn't actually look to see any people who have more professional opinions, but Malwarebytes put out an article on this. And they're using the typical, when you empty your recycle bin, it's not deleting the file kind of excuse. So they're pretty much saying here on Malwarebytes, when you delete a file, all that happens is you remove the pointer, which makes it hard to find, but not impossible.
I mean, that's possible, but how would something from 2010 not be overwritten by now? And I mean, that person probably would have moved phones by now.
I don't know, but the implication from Malwarebytes Labs is that this is simply them not essentially wiping the free space on the disks. Again, no one knows. I haven't even seen security researchers make a stance on this. So I don't feel like I can make a stance on this without getting some more information. I feel like no one knows what the hell is going on.
This is a classic case of if you hate Apple, you're oh my God, this is a smoking gun. How can you not, how can you possibly defend them? It's so obvious. But then, there's also, and not that I'm saying you're an Apple shill. There's people who love Apple who will say well, no, Henry's got a point. Malwarebytes has a point. What if it's just a bug? I guess my final stance is until we get more information, we can't say anything for sure, but it definitely is not a good look. And it raises a lot of questions, a lot of side eye, a lot of eyebrows.
Agreed. And I think once we get an update to the story, we can actually give a proper assessment of either WTF Apple, embarrassing, big red flag, smoking gun, or, oh, wow, that's just a really crappy bug, super unlucky, doesn't really reflect the company's values and how safe they can make all their products.
I mean, at this point, I just hope we get an update. The fact that Apple hasn't commented yet makes me feel like they're just going to sweep it under the rug and move on until everyone forgets. They're going to do a Chris Brown. They're just going to ignore the problem until everyone forgets about it. I think as far as practical takeaways, I think this is a good reminder with the very, 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 very limited information we have on this, it seems to have only impacted people who use iCloud. So try to avoid iCloud. If you do use iCloud, make sure to enable the advanced data protection. iPhones are still very secure. regardless of how you feel about Apple, they're very secure and they're generally not selling ad space. They're not doing a lot of targeted advertising compared to like Google. So I know we got to say it. Obviously, the perfect solution in a perfect world is to flash a custom operating system on your phone. But there's just a lot of situations where that's not feasible, especially in this economy. So if you're stuck on an iPhone, this is just a reminder to beware of the cloud, or even on an Android device, just beware of the cloud. Again, that's based on incomplete information. Maybe after we post this, somebody will leave in the comments, be like, hey, I've never used iCloud and I was affected by this, but based on the limited information we have right now, that's all I got.
I'm going to be following this very closely because I'm going to be waiting for more people to give some opinions. I'm sure someone's going to actually, at some point, someone I think is going to have some kind of take that makes sense. And like a technical take, not I have a take, but a like technical, like I did some research into this and here's what I think is going on. We're going to move on to the data breaches. And so we're going to start with the post-millennial hack, which leaked data impacting 26 million people. It's actually a conservative Canadian online news magazine belonging to the Human Events Media Group, which also operates the American Human Events news platform. The exposed data includes full names, emails, usernames, passwords, IP addresses, phone numbers, physical addresses, genders. The data allegedly belongs to writers, editors, and subscribers to the sites, which could create significant privacy and security risks to the exposed individuals.
Our next breach comes from Australia, where First Mac, which is their largest non-bank lender, is warning of a data breach. This includes full name, residential address, email address, phone number, date of birth, external bank account information, driver's license number. There was no indication of how many people were affected in the article, but the attackers say they stole 500 gigabytes of data.
Helsinki suffers a data breach after hackers exploit an unpatched flaw. This affects over 80,000 students and their guardians, and the access drive contains tens of millions of files, mostly devoid of personally identifiable information, but it still included usernames, email addresses, personal IDs, and physical addresses. Some, I should add. So that wasn't for everybody, but there were some of those data points in there. The exposed drive contained information about fees, childhood education and care, children's status, welfare status, medical certificates, and other highly sensitive information.
The Singing River Health System, which is a major healthcare provider in the U.S. state of Mississippi, had a data breach of 895,000 people. This included full name, date of birth, physical address, social security number, medical information, and health information. Of course, they said there is no evidence at this time that any of the data is being used for identity theft, but they are offering 24 months of credit monitoring and identity restoration services.
Banco Santander warns of a data breach exposing customer info. It's a bank that has a strong presence in Spain, the UK, Brazil, Mexico, and the US, and it's one of the largest and most significant banks in the world, known for a diverse range of products and services, serving over 140 million people. They disclosed a data breach incident that has impacted employees and customers in Spain, Chile, and Uruguay. The bank did not disclose any details about the types of data exposed, but noted that transaction information or online banking account credentials were not impacted.
Nissan North America had a data breach impacting over 53,000 employees. This was a notification with the Office of the Maine Attorney General. The company states that exposed details included a personal identifier such as name and social security numbers, but financial details were not present in the files accessed by the threat actor, and they are offering 24 months of credit monitoring and ID theft protection via Experian.
Cybercriminal claims theft of India's Samco account data. Samco Securities, which is one of the widely used platforms offering discount broking trading accounts for the country's stock exchanges, and their data was allegedly breached from Samco on a known cybercrime forum, which they're selling for an undisclosed amount. TechCrunch was given a sample of the stolen data, which they verified matched personal information of customers.
This next one's also real quick. MediSecure, which is an electronic prescription corporation. Like, I guess they handle the filing of, filling of prescriptions. They were hit by a, quote, large-scale ransomware data breach, and that's really it. The only other detail of note is they say that they were indirectly impacted, so it was like a third-party vendor that impacted their data.
WebTPA data breach impacts 2.4 million insurance policyholders. This is a third-party administrator that provides customized administrative services to health plans and insurance companies. Some of the impacted people are customers at large insurable companies such as The Hartford, Transamerica, and Gerber Life Insurance. It includes full names, contact information, date of birth, social security numbers, and insurance information.
With that, we'll go into companies, and we're going to start off with the Google I/O conference. So for those who might be new to this, every year, mostly Apple and Google, every company kind of does their little thing, but Apple and Google especially, they have this big conference where they say, here's all the cool stuff we're doing this year. And so this is like 6 articles, I think, and I'm just kind of taking the interesting parts from each one. But I can give you the summary in 2 letters. It's AI. On to the privacy and security related stuff. So first off, the company said they are increasing the on-device capability of its Google Play Protect system to detect fraudulent apps trying to breach sensitive permissions. They will use AI to detect if apps are trying to interact with other services and apps in an unauthorized manner. If the system is certain about malicious behavior, it disables the app automatically. Otherwise, it will alert the company for review and alert the user. They've announced this new feature called Private Space, which lets users silo a portion of the operating system for sensitive information. It's a bit like incognito mode for the mobile operating system, sectioning designated apps into a container. The space is available from the launcher and can be locked as a second layer of authentication. Apps in Private Space will be hidden from notifications, settings, and recents. Users can still access the apps through the system share sheet and photo picker in the main space, so long as the private space has been unlocked. It should arrive with the release of Android 15, which is expected at some point in late summer or early fall. Another article said that Android phones will soon use AI to automatically detect when they have been snatched from your hand and lock themselves. Next up, Gemini will listen to your phone calls. One demo involved a scam phone call where the scammer on the other end claimed fraudulent charges were happening on your account, and the best way to secure your money would be to transfer it to a new account. After hearing the scammer speak the request to transfer money, the phone app popped up with a warning: likely scam, banks will never ask you to move your money to keep it safe. And last but not least, I think this is from that same article, Google says that some of these features will require the pay-per-month Gemini Advanced. The company says all of these features will happen on device, so your phone calls and PDFs will not be streamed to the internet, and Google says the features will be opt-in.
On the topic of Apple and Google, I guess I will probably keep my comments in the Patreon version, but I was talking about Apple briefly. But Apple and Google agree on a standard to alert people when unknown Bluetooth devices may be tracking them, which has been an issue we've talked about so much on this podcast with all these Bluetooth tracking devices. So this standard is called Detecting Unwanted Location Trackers. Apple is introducing the capability in iOS 17.5, and Google is launching it on Android 6.0 plus devices. So even if you go back to Android 6, they're still going to release the functionality, which is really cool. Well, asterisk. Android 6 devices. I don't know if they're going to port this back to Android 6 or ever since devices that shipped with Android 6 on the newest version. Unclear. So now you're going to get an item found moving with you alert on their device if an unknown Bluetooth tracking device is seen moving with them, regardless of the platform the device is paired with. Bluetooth tag companies, including Chipolo, Eufy, Geo, Motorola, and Pebblebee have committed that future tags will be compatible with the new industry standard.
Visa adds a new way to share customer shopping data with retailers. The data will be shared via the payment giant's proprietary tokens, which provide an added layer of security between a consumer's bank information and a merchant. Shopping inclinations and other information based on past transactions, such as preferred categories like movies or golf, will be shared via tokens with retailers with the consent of consumers. The payments company is also aiming to make it easier for consumers to make purchases by introducing a payment passkey, a quick facial recognition triggered click-to-pay experience. It's much like Apple's Apple Pay, but it works for every browser and mobile device using facial recognition capabilities built into most recent mobile devices.
VMware makes Workstation Pro and Fusion Pro free for personal use. Just a shout out for people who use virtual machines. After registering for a VMware account and installing Workstation Pro or Fusion, you'll be greeted with a screen asking if you use the product for personal use or in a commercial setting. You must enter a purchase license key if you use it for business, but for personal use, you just select that option and it'll install with all its standard features with no limitations. So one more virtual machine option for all of you out there.
Research. Does Apple's required reason API thwart device fingerprinting? Quoting the article, starting May 1st, 2024, Apple requires developers to declare reasons if their apps use APIs that can potentially be misused to collect unique device signals. These unique signals enable abusers to derive a device identifier or fingerprint and result in tracking user activities across different apps of different developers. Such APIs are referred to as the required reason API. To prevent misuse of these APIs, Apple will reject apps that don't describe their use of the APIs in their privacy manifest file. However, we found that apps such as Google Chrome, Instagram, Spotify, and Threads don't adhere to their declared reasons. While forcing developers to describe their use of required reason API is a great starting point to stop fingerprinting, it gives a false sense of privacy. Apple doesn't provide a mechanism to enforce what developers declare. We have seen this approach when Apple introduced privacy nutrition labels. There is no mechanism to verify what developers show on their app's privacy nutrition labels. All in all, you should always exercise judgment and only install apps of developers you trust.
Right, and now we have the politics, and we're going to start with Vermont, a state in the US which has passed data privacy law allowing consumers to sue companies. This is one of the country's strongest comprehensive data privacy laws, with the language allowing individuals to sue companies for violating their privacy rights, which is an unprecedented provision among similar existing state laws. The bill includes data minimization requirements, which significantly constrain what personal data companies can gather and use, and bans companies from selling consumers sensitive data, allowing them to sue if they believe the business has done so. The private right of action allows individuals to hold companies which they believe have violated their rights accountable without relying on state authorities to bring action. A similar provision included in Illinois' biometric privacy law has led to a wave of class action lawsuits alleging corporate malfeasance. The Vermont bill's private right of action will need to be reauthorized after 2 years and applies to any business or person that processes more than 100,000 consumer records. The legislation also establishes tough civil rights safeguards to prevent discrimination.
This next story, the headline says new police tech can detect phones, pet trackers, and library books in a moving car. The technology is called LSEG EOC Plus, and it is typically incorporated into one of the manufacturer's license plate readers, though it can be deployed as a standalone surveillance device and is designed to help police monitor suspects as they move. But privacy advocates told Forbes the new technology could be abused to warrantlessly track people across large trenches of the country, learning more about them by identifying their belongings without their knowledge. Leonardo, which is the manufacturer, they claim the tool can identify specific models of devices like iPhones and Bose headphones inside moving vehicles, and it can also identify unique signals emitted by pet chips, Wi-Fi, and Bluetooth devices, wearable tech like fitness trackers, in-car infotainment systems, and tire pressure sensors, and it can even detect the RFID of a library book. For the record, that all came from the brochure from the company, and historically those do tend to be a little exaggerated, but even if it's slightly exaggerated, like even if this is half true, it's still pretty concerning. They wrote in the brochure, customers of the new technology may not be limited to police departments or public roads. It could be useful in off-road areas such as rail stations and shopping centers. And Forbes reported earlier this month that malls across the US are already equipped with AI-powered car surveillance technologies from Leonardo rival Flock Safety and are feeding data straight to police agencies in a bid to catch shoplifters. Last month, Byron Tao, who is an author and reporter at NOTUS, revealed that similar technology made by a German company called Genoptic had been trialed by US law enforcement in 2 Texas counties, though it's unclear how widely it was deployed.
Ireland, privacy watchdog confirms Dell data breach investigation. So this is an update to last week, but the Ireland Data Protection Commission Deputy Commissioner confirmed that the DPC has received a breach notification on the matter, referring to Dell, which is currently under assessment. Asked to elaborate, he declined to comment. An unnamed Dell spokesperson also confirmed that the technology giant notified regulators and will continue to work with them as appropriate.
French TikTok block in overseas territory sets dangerous precedent, critics warn. So in a first-of-its-kind move within the EU, the French government has moved to block TikTok in one of its overseas territories amid widespread protests. So this actually goes back to a law that was passed on Monday that would let citizens vote in local elections after 10 years of residency in New Caledonia, which is prompting opposition from independence activists worried it will dilute the representation of indigenous people. Demonstrations have turned violent. At least 5 people have been killed and hundreds have been injured. And according to this article, they only have a population of 270,000. So it's pretty serious. And in response to the protests, the government suspended the popular video sharing app as part of its state of emergency measures, alongside the deployment of troops and an initial 12-day curfew. The French Prime Minister did not detail the reasons for shutting down the platform. The local telecom regulator began blocking the app earlier on Wednesday. And TikTok replied by saying, "It is regrettable that an administrative decision to suspend TikTok service has been taken on the territory of New Caledonia without any questions or requests to remove content from the authorities or the French government. Our security teams are monitoring the situation very closely and ensuring that our platform remains safe for our users. We are ready to engage in discussions with authorities."
We only have one FOSS story, free and open source, and it's about F-Droid, which is the open source app store for Android users. And there's a repository overhaul in the new client 1.2. It's a little bit technical, but let's dive into it. So previously, if you added a new repo, it would get added with a higher priority than the pre-added official F-Droid repo, which allowed the newly added repo to override apps built by F-Droid. Maybe a good example of this is if you use something like NewPipe, and you added the NewPipe repo manually, the newly added NewPipe repo that you added would override apps built by F-Droid. This could alter the app description and offer their own versions for the app for installation. Now, with the new 1.2 release of the F-Droid client, newly added repos get added with a lower priority so that apps from the F-Droid repo take precedent by default. Furthermore, when tapping an app, the user sees the app details screen as usual, but a new box at the top clearly shows the repo the app comes from. And if the app is available from more than one repo, the box in the app details screen should become a dropdown where the user can see all the repos and choose which one should be used for installation, updates, and app information. It's now also possible to reorder the position of repos in the list. For example, if NewPipe's repo is added and the user always wants to prefer apps from that repo, they can now move the NewPipe repo to the top. Repos can have an archive where old apps or old versions of apps that are no longer relevant get moved to. Historically, these archives were shown as regular repos to the user, but now they're no longer shown in the list, but have moved to the detail screen of each repo.
We also have one Misfits story. This is an update to an ongoing thing. Tornado Cash developer found guilty of laundering $1.2 billion worth of cryptocurrency. Over the course of 2 days in March, the Russian national was tried on the allegation that the tool he had developed had allowed criminals, among them hackers with ties to North Korea, to freely launder $1.2 billion in stolen cryptocurrency. I think this was a quote from the prosecutors. They said these services are promoted as a way to improve the level of privacy available to crypto users, but have been readily co-opted for the purpose of money laundering. According to the prosecutors, money laundering activity accounted for more than 30% of the funds that passed through Tornado Cash between 2019 and 2022. Meanwhile, the developer, quote, deliberately looked away, doing nothing to prevent the criminal activity. Quoting the prosecutors again, the developer wasn't blind, he knew perfectly well what was happening, but chose not to intervene. The dev built his defense on the argument that Tornado Cash, which remains in operation, is under nobody's control, including his own, as a piece of software that runs on the blockchain. Although he cannot dictate how users interact with Tornado Cash directly through the blockchain, he and the other developers were in de facto control, the prosecutors argued, because they operated the web interface through which the majority of transactions were fed. While the dev added functionality to the web interface that allowed legitimate users to spread their funds from those arriving from known criminal addresses, they characterized the effort as too little too late. And those were all our stories this week. Apple users' old photos are suddenly reappearing without explanation. Police can track Bluetooth devices in moving cars. A bunch of privacy news from Google's I/O event, most of it AI related, and much more. As a reminder, if you want to help support this podcast, we have a Patreon where you will get an extended version with more of our thoughts, or you can ask us a question for the Q&A. If you don't care about perks and you just want an easy recurring way to support us, we do have LibrePay. And last but not least, we do still accept Monero. No need for Tornado Cash or Whirlpool, and we don't see anything about you, but we do appreciate all of you supporting us. And of course, if money is really tight right now, believe me, I am in the same boat, so I get it. It's still really helpful to leave a comment, like, subscribe, share the podcast around, all that kind of stuff. Thank you guys so much for listening. Links to the stories can be found in the show notes, and if you have a story that you think we should cover, you can send it to news@surveillancereport.tech. Last but not least, please, again, share the podcast around with friends and family. Make sure you are subscribed. Give us a rating if you're on a platform where that's an option. We're trying to reach as many people as possible with the message of privacy and keep you guys updated, and every little thing helps us do that. So thank you again, and we will see you next week.